Hey, 48 North fans, we're here today with a really special guest for an interview about the America's Cup. We have Tucker Thompson, an award-winning TV host and commentator. He's been very involved in the America's Cup over the years, including as a sailor and as a champion sailor in other venues as well. These days, he is involved with the American Magic team, helping out with New York Yacht Club's nationwide yacht club tour, and is very well known as a public speaker, giving hundreds of presentations related to the America's Cup all the time. So thrilled to have Tucker with us here today, and looking forward to a little update about all things America's Cup here in May 2020.
Thank you, Joe. Great to be here. You know, the last time we talked about 48 North, we were talking about a print article years ago, looking forward to Bermuda, and now in this new environment, it's all online, and you're sitting at home. I'm sitting at home, embarrassingly, in my closet of my bedroom that I have converted into a recording studio for things like this. But again, it's great to be with you. I'm honored to be here with you in 48 North, and I welcome and thank all the readers and fans.
All right, terrific. So I've described to you in a 48 North audience that probably is excited about the America's Cup, but may not be, super enthusiasts in terms of like daily following of news and updates. So considering our broad audience here in the Pacific Northwest, I'm hoping you can give us a little bit of an overview of kind of what's been going on with the 36th America's Cup. So I'm sure our readers are familiar with the fact that Team Emerites New Zealand won the last cup, and that they have selected monohull foiling boats. But beyond that, what else can you tell us? Who are the teams to start with?
Well, there are three official challengers right now. Obviously, you have Emerites Team New Zealand that is the defender. So by the rules, they will be in the final match of the America's Cup in March of 2021 in New Zealand. The challenger of record, who's basically representing the other challengers, the official challenger of record is Luna Rossa Prada Pirelli. The Luna Rossa team with Patrizio Bertelli behind it is now in their sixth America's Cup challenge. That's a record. They have eclipsed Sir Thomas Lipton with his Shamrock challenges. He had 5 and lost all 5 of them. So Italy's now in their 6th challenge. We also have Ineos Team UK, Sir Ben Ainsley, and leading his second America's Cup attempt after the first one. Very impressively, got to the end in Bermuda and then fell short. So I think they're going to have a better program this time around. Certainly well funded and very talented. And then finally, the team that I'm obviously very fond of, a big fan of, but also working closely with, is New York Yacht Club American Magic. This is the 4th time New York Yacht Club has attempted to win back the America's Cup since its loss in 1983 to Australia. The previous 3 attempts, unfortunately, were unsuccessful. But honestly, if New York Yacht Club is going to win back the Cup, and what an amazing and all-American historic story that would be, I personally believe this is very likely the best chance that they've had yet to date to do so. And the biggest reason, other than the fact that they've got the right team, the right backing, and the right sailors, is the fact that the new boat, as you mentioned, the AC-75, is something that all 4 teams have not raced yet. It's brand new technology, so that levels the playing field a little bit. And what a great story it would also be for American sailing. A big shot in the arm if the Cup finally comes back to New York Yacht Club where it all started. And I think it would revolutionize and revitalize sailing in the United States.
Yeah. Well, can you give us a little bit more window into the boat? We know 75-foot foiling monohulls are the big story, but in terms of how the teams are approaching that puzzle differently, what can you tell us?
Yeah, so Emirates Team New Zealand and Luna Rossa Prada Pirelli, the challenger and the defender, worked together on the design. So that really meant they had at least a 6-month advantage on the other 2 teams as far as what the boat was going to look like. And their designers, since they have written the rule, they were farther down the track with what the boat's going to eventually look and perform like. And it's no surprise that those 2 teams, the boats that they launched, look very similar. In terms of style. They both have more traditional bows. They've got a sort of I don't know what you'd call it, a spline or a false keel down the center of it to help implement foiling earlier, and some other attributes. Both very sleek aerodynamic packages. And then you've got Ineos Team UK, the British team, and American Magic went for more of a scow, flat-bottomed look. Although interestingly, the British boat has now they've glued a spline onto the bottom of it, so there must be something to that. Personally, I think American Magic, and I know I sound biased, but I think American Magic's approach to it looks pretty impressive. I'm not a designer, so I don't know for sure, but I like their bow. You know, I asked Terry Hutchinson in one of the, I've done, you know, as you mentioned, hundreds of presentations about the America's Cup in the past year and a half, focusing on American Magic. And in one of the shows, Terry was with me. I asked him, you know, Terry, when you launch this brand new AC-75 with the team that no one's ever seen before, is it going to look more like a boat or more like an airplane? You know, Airbus is their primary sponsor, and 37 of their engineers are working with the team. And he looked at me and said, no comment. And I think that said a lot. And you look at the bow, and the bow looks more like the nose of an airplane than it does a boat. And you'd have to say, since the boats are spending 100% of the time, or trying to anyway, flying, that's probably a good approach. They all have their first boat. They can build two. So we're going to see version 2 of all 4 teams launch over the summer as they look towards New Zealand to train for the Cup. And I personally think we're probably going to start to see some similarities, because all the teams have been spying and studying each other. So they know very well what's working and what isn't. But it's exciting times for the America's Cup. This is untested technology. And I've seen it once. I went down to Pensacola to see the team training in Defiant, which is the name of American Magic's AC-75. And it's one of those things. I remember the first time I saw the AC-72 in San Francisco for the 2013 Cup. You know, I'd seen all the YouTube videos and clips and read everything, but nothing takes place of seeing something that big live in person, lift up out of the water 6-7 feet in the air and go, you know, upwards of 40-50 miles an hour over the water. It is something that messes with your eyes to see, because it doesn't look possible. And yet these things are doing it with ease. The AC-75s, you know, within 90 minutes of their launch, American Magic's Defiant was foiling and doing foiling maneuvers. So it's not only impressive technology, it's impressive what the designers and engineers have been able to do with it, and the sailors.
Yeah, truly. And, you know, clearly with the videos that are coming out, it does look like the foiling mechanisms are just getting more and more refined, more and more consistent across a wider range of conditions, that kind of thing. But you were telling me that that in terms of some aspects of stability when not under sail, they're a little bit less stable. And specifically, even though American Magic was able to foil in 90 minutes, it only took them 5 minutes to capsize the boat. Is that right?
Well, their training boat, they had a 50% scale model called the Mule that they spent the previous year training in to get up to speed on this technology, and also design and test systems for the 75-foot boat. But yes, they have publicly admitted that boat has capsized quite a lot. And it's interesting because the boat doesn't capsize when it's going over 40 knots. It capsizes when it's not moving at all, and they disconnect the tow from the power boat. That's the majority of the times that they've flipped. And it's because when the boat is stable and it isn't foiling, they have very little stability. I mean, you've got a massive sailboat with no keel at all, no riding moment sitting under it. But once they start foiling, let's put it to you this way, it takes 75 kilos of weight at the top of the rig to capsize an AC-75. When they're foiling, it takes 30 tons to counteract the riding moment. That gives you an idea of how stable they are. They're more stable, and they have more riding moment than the catamarans did in the previous 2 America's Cups. And it's because they can articulate the foils outward and just keep resisting the increased power in the sail plan. But it's impressive to see. It's certainly going to be exciting.
Wow, incredible. So let's shift gears a little bit and dig in a little bit to your partnership with American Magic. Can you describe for us how you're involved with that team?
Sure. Well, this is now my 5th America's Cup that I've been involved in. 1 as a sailor, and the last 3 covering the event, doing live commentary for TV or on site with the stadium sailing in San Francisco and Bermuda. Now I'm working directly with the American team, New York Yacht Club American Magic. Terry Hutchinson, a longtime friend of mine, approached me a little over a year ago after I completed a 2.5-year America's Cup Yacht Club tour for the Bermuda America's Cup. I did 103 shows, multimedia shows about the Cup, and I think it's an understatement to say I'm extremely excited and passionate about the America's Cup, and actually related to it. I didn't mention that to you yesterday, but I'm a Schuyler, related to George Lee Schuyler. I'm the only person in this game, in a Cup game, I think that I know that's actually related to the trophy.
Wow.
So that made it kind of exciting for me, but I'm, I live and breathe it, and Terry knows that. And he came to me and he said, look, I'm impressed with what you're doing with the Yacht Club tour. We want to do something similar, but we don't want to reinvent the wheel. Can you become our, sort of public spokesperson at yacht clubs? And so, of course, I said yes. And as a New York Yacht Club member and personal friend of Terry's, that was an easy decision. I'm honored to do it. I think I've done over 50 of them now, probably more than that. And now in this new COVID-19 environment of staying at home, my live shows on site and in front of hundreds of people at yacht clubs have now turned into sitting in my bedroom closet with you. And, that's just a sign of the times. But the Yacht Club Tour is going to continue virtually. I'm going to be doing them. I had 37 clubs interested in having me do these virtual shows. They're exactly the same as the live ones. I do all the latest content from the team, and I also have my own sponsors of the Yacht Club Tour. I'd like to, if you don't mind, take a quick moment to thank not only American Magic, the primary sponsor, but Quantum Sails, Regatta Craft Mixers, Moorings Charters, and Beecham Yachts. And speaking of Regatta Craft, I told them every interview I've done has been close to cocktail hour, so I use one of their mixers. We just invented with rum something called the Tucker Punch.
Yeah,
basically nice. A rum punch.
And when is it not close to cocktail hour? Really?
Right. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. So I'd like to invite all of you guys to have a cocktail with Regatta Craft Mixers. But that's enough of the sponsor mentions, and also thanks to 48 North.
Oh, great. Good. So let's return to Terry Hutchinson. He's CEO and, really driving the bus with American Magic. So tell us a little bit about your history with him and kind of what you see from him in terms of his leadership with American Magic.
Yeah, Terry is a born leader. He's now skipper of the team and executive director. So he's leading the team on the water and off the water. He'll be doing tactics as well. And I've known Terry for over 30 years. I've raced with him quite a bit, a long time ago, and now working with him in this capacity. And like I said, he is one of the most natural, driven, born leaders that you can come across. And on the water, it shows in his tactical ability to run a program and to win on the race course. But what I think is more impressive now is seeing him make this shift into leading an America's Cup team. And that's no easy task. You go from running a program on the water and essentially, he's trained his whole life for doing that. But the America's Cup is very much a corporation, even before it is a sailing event, and he's managing over 140 employees and well over $100 million budget, thanks to the generous support of the backers. He's got Hap Fouth and Doug DeVos and Roger Penske. And of course, he's honored, and he'll tell you this, to represent and humbled to be representing the New York Yacht Club. The history of that club's involvement in the event is not lost on Terry. But what impresses me about Terry, and you can see it most recently in what they're doing during this COVID-19 crisis, is how adept he is at making decisions. He leads this team off the water the same way he calls tactics on the water. He looks at all the information. He's brutally honest. He expects the absolute best out of his teammates, and even more so from himself. He leads by example. Which I find very impressive, because he really empowers people to rise to the highest level of the occasion. But most recently, if you look at the decisions that they've made, Terry's made with this team, they've been very bold. Striking out very early when they started the team, deciding to build a mule, the test boat, when no other team had done a full 50% scale model and that ended up being a big advantage. The Kiwis have now copied it. Italians did as well, and the Brits, to be fair, had a smaller version. And right now, the latest very hard decision that he had to make was to stop training in Pensacola, Florida, where they've been training for the past year and a half in the winter, and ship all operations as well down to New Zealand during the downtime. Very smart call, but also very risky, because right now foreigners can't access New Zealand, can't come into the country. And when even nationals of New Zealand, when they do come in, they've got to quarantine for 14 days. So they're rolling the dice a little bit that the 30 to 35 day trip, and the ship just took off with the boat and all their gear. When it gets to New Zealand, hopefully the travel ban will be lifted enough to the next lower alert level, and allow the teams to start shifting their focus to New Zealand. So anyway, he's a very impressive leader, both on and off the water, and I have the utmost respect for him.
Great. Well, and it's I think it's both interesting and inspiring to hear about the ways that he is, like any good tactician, responding to the various inputs and making changes that are necessary to keep the boat moving forward and, you know, keep that opportunity to win, you know, alive and well.
I'll give you one example that I like about Terry. Recently working with him, you know, he always tells me we need to underpromise and overdeliver. He's very humble and very honest. Our very first presentation we did for New York Yacht Club American Magic was fittingly at 44th Street New York Yacht Club, almost 2 years ago now. We practiced, we prepared for weeks, had all the content. We showed up. You know, Terry asked me to be there over a day early for a 1-hour talk. You know, that shows you how committed he is to making sure that everything is buttoned up and prepared. We knocked it out of the ballpark. It was a great night, packed house. And I left the stage and you know, sort of retired at the end of the night feeling like we'd really done something special. And I was very proud of that. And the next morning, Terry called and he said, listen, great job, you know, last night, but I want to know what we did wrong. And I thought, oh, geez, man, I thought we did pretty good, you know? And he said, yeah, no, everything was great. It really was good, but that's not what concerns me. What can we do better? And that's how he approaches everything. So, you know, in a microcosm, I was impressed by that. And he wants me to approach these presentations like that, the same way they approach trying to win the America's Cup. Every detail counts.
Wow. Cool. Very cool. So clearly you mentioned his decision to move the entire operation to New Zealand, and that is at least in part a response to the COVID-19 pandemic that's affecting all the teams. So for our readers who maybe aren't following Cup news on a day-to-day basis, can you give us a little bit of an overview on what you're hearing about how the pandemic has been affecting operations from the other teams?
Well, yeah, unsurprisingly, there isn't a corner of the earth that hasn't been touched by the pandemic and is reacting accordingly. You know, and it's negatively affecting everybody. We all know that, and the teams are not immune to that. All 4 of them, you know, initially halted training. You know, when everything broke out, and the timing was quite unique because the first World Series event, where all the teams would finally get a chance to sail against each other in these new AC-75, was supposed to be the 3rd weekend of April. And that's in Italy, in Cagliari, Italy. And that's, you know, the epicenter of coronavirus broke out. And by, I think, mid to late March, the teams were getting ready to travel there and ship the AC-75s. New Zealand had already sent their boat from New Zealand because it's so far, so it's in transit. American Magic was 3 days out from putting theirs on a ship when everything got canceled. Very lucky, actually, that they didn't put it on the ship, because New Zealand lost 5 or 6 weeks in New Zealand and another couple months worth of training just because of that. And then the Portsmouth event, which was the second World Series event, was subsequently canceled. And so, you know, all teams halted training for a while. Fortunately, 2 of them are getting back up to speed, although in this environment slightly differently. After 6 weeks of lockdown, New Zealand's back on the water with their test boat, their training boat, because the big boat is still being shipped back to New Zealand after the races didn't take place in Europe. And the Italian team is training, albeit in a very unique way, to social distance on the boat. They have 2/3 of the crew is not sailing the grinders, so they're using essentially battery power to control the systems and keep training. Ineos Team UK moved their operation from Italy, where they were training, sent everything back to England. They have not gotten back on the water. They're still in lockdown. Of course, here in the US, we are as well. And Terry, you know, I think, had the opportunity to go training, but made the very responsible, again, a very tough and responsible call to respect the health of his team and the community in Pensacola, Florida, by not putting them in danger and staying off the water. You know, they're training in the gym at home. They have, you know, grinding machines in their apartments. The designers are still going full bore, but the sailing team, unfortunately, is on hold. And all the more reason why moving everything to New Zealand made sense at this time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot that's stopped for everybody, but clearly for these teams as well. Now, as a former Cup sailor, I can only imagine how training has changed in the last 20 years as the boats have changed. But do you know anything about what, you know, a modern Cup sailor's gym routine looks like in 2020?
I do, and that's one reason I would never want to be involved in the America's Cup today. I mean, there's no way I could keep up. It's clearly physical fitness is a big part of the America's Cup, always has been, but since the catamarans and the evolution of grinders creating the mechanical power, and the hydraulic power really for the systems, they've turned into machines on the boat, and their workout routine is off the charts. I mean, I can give you an example. Oracle Team USA in the last Cup would hire ex-Navy SEALs to help them with their training regime. They train in the gym in the morning. They go out grinding all day long on the boat, and often they'll do cardio or something else in the gym when they get back off the water. It is psychotic level of physical training, and I personally, it's probably it's probably a bit too much. I'd like to see the grinders going back to being involved in sail trimming and not just generating rote power in terms of hydraulic oil pressure to manipulate the control systems, because what you're doing is you're really reducing the population of available sailors that could get involved in this game, unless you're a gorilla and an absolute physical specimen of an athlete. Not that that's a bad thing, but I think we could bring it back a bit more in the hands of traditional sailors, and focus a little bit less on the psycho level of athletics and the incredible level of technology, and bring it back to the human element a bit more in the America's Cup.
Got it. And just to clarify, sailors certainly would have noticed the New Zealand team generating that grinding power with bicycles in the last Cup. There is no bikes in the 36th Cup at the moment.
Correct. The cyclor grinders, which were quite a revolutionary innovation by the Kiwis. Of course, Kiwis always innovative and secret about their innovations. And that was a smart call. Your thighs generate 40% more than your arms. Interestingly, after winning the Cup with the cycle grinders, they wrote in the new protocol that all grinding has to be done by hand in a circular motion, effectively no more pedal power, which was an advantage that they held in the last America's Cup. Another thing in the protocol that I find very interesting, and you can't make this stuff up, it's only the America's Cup, of the 11 crew members on the AC-75, they all have to be human, no artificial intelligence. And there were automated systems that were manually driven in the previous 2 America's Cups. They're trying to do away with that, even though there are automated flight control systems on the boats now while they're training, because they're learning from that technology. In the aviation world, all that stuff has to be removed, and everything has to be controlled manually, manual inputs by the sailors, which is a good thing.
Yeah, cool. So you were mentioning those America's Cup World Series events that unfortunately did have to be canceled. The next one on the books is in New Zealand in December. You referred to it as the Christmas Cup. Is there any other scuttlebutt that you're hearing about what might happen between now and that scheduled World Series event in December?
So they looked at a lot of World Series of venues 2 years ago. They settled on 3. And as we just mentioned, and as you know, the Italian event and the event in Portsmouth, England, the first 2 events are canceled, not to be rescheduled. And the third one is the Christmas Cup, December 17 through 20 in Auckland, New Zealand. Basically, the final event was all the teams would be in New Zealand, be the last practice really before they got into the Challenger Series. But all the teams have agreed that possibly putting one more on the schedule in early December or late November would benefit all of the teams and give them practice that they have since lost in Italy and Great Britain. I think that's a good call and something that we probably would see.
Cool. Well, we'll keep our ears to the ground for that. And if one does get added to the schedule, we'll be posting about it at 48north.com, I'm sure. So in terms of this, the stuff that does appear to be happening in the lead up to the 2021 Cup in New Zealand, what excites you personally about the upcoming Cup?
Oh gosh, what doesn't excite me? Everything about the America's Cup's exciting. And for your readers and viewers that haven't had a chance to see the Cup firsthand and experience it for themselves, if you're a sailing fan in any remote fashion, you owe it to yourself once in your life at least to go see the America's Cup. It is incredible. It is everything that you love about sailing on steroids. Think the Super Bowl. If you're a football fan, you go all the way to the Super Bowl. It's at a whole nother level. And it's in Auckland, New Zealand this time around, the city of sails. They've hosted it twice before, and there's no doubt that they're going to be one of the best hosts of the America's Cup. They're already planning for it in Auckland again. I often tell people ask me, when should we go see the Cup if we want to travel to Auckland? If you are considering coming to the America's Cup in New Zealand to see it, don't come just for the racing. Try to stay for 2 weeks, because New Zealand is one of those countries. It's one of those faraway places that is unlike anywhere else in the world. And so if you're going to come see the America's Cup, spend a week in Auckland, see the racing, and then go spend a week touring the North Island and particularly the South Island as well. I actually have linked up with a travel company in New York that represents New Zealand. I met them at an America's Cup event, and I said, hey, look, I do this yacht club tour. I talk to tens of thousands of people a year. And ultimately, people, when we finish talking about the Cup, want to know, okay, if we come, how do we get there? What are the best flights, hotels, spectator boats, and other options? So this group represents all of those things at a discounted rate. It's a big benefit to book all of that. And this is not a sales pitch. I actually personally will pass people on to the woman who runs the account in New York, and you can take it from there. You can handle it on your own, whatever. If you are interested, email me at tucker@tuckerthompson.com, and I'd be happy to help you out.
Cool. And we'll include that link in the post where we post this video as well. Yeah, pretty exciting actually to think about attending the Cup. I mean, I think with the present travel restrictions, it seems far away, but a lot can change. Everything's changing so fast. I'm sure that there are many sailors still working out their plans to think about getting to Auckland to see this Cup in person. For those who won't be attending in person, what are we hearing about how sailors can follow the Cup, either following Cup news, or then once the events actually start happening, how can sailors watch what's going on the water?
Unlike the last America's Cup, this is going to be broadcast free to air around the world, so you can log on and watch the coverage. And of course, the different nationalities will have broadcast rights in different countries covering the event. I think this is going to be one of the most covered America's Cups, specifically because of this new environment that we're all in because of coronavirus. It's unknown how open and how accessible from a fan standpoint the Cup will be. It is a little less than a year away still, so there's a lot of time, hopefully, to get the health crisis under control. But that being said, it's likely to be somewhat less physically attended and more virtually attended for that reason. So I think there are going to be a lot of opportunities on the internet, video blogs, social media, YouTube, Facebook, and of course, television as well. So if you don't get a chance to come to New Zealand, I think there are going to be a lot of options to experience the America's Cup. I personally hope I'm going to be part of some version of that, but it's yet to be determined, Joe, so I'll let you know.
Sounds good. And in terms of just general Cup news now, if this video inspires our readers to pay a little bit more attention to Cup news in the sort of day-to-day, where do you go to check out Cup news, or where do you recommend readers do that?
Well, obviously, americascup.com. General information about the Cup and all four of the teams. But also my good friend Jack Griffin runs a website called cupexperience.com. You can sign up for his newsletter. And really, when I was preparing for all the TV coverage of the previous two America's Cups or the live commentary that I did on site, honestly, I would go to Jack's website and I would study everything that he was posting, because he puts all the effort into getting the inside scoop from every team. He's been involved in the Cup for many years, and he's just very passionate about sharing, his wealth of knowledge about the America's Cup. So I would definitely recommend that.
Sounds great. Last question about the upcoming Cup. Admitting your bias and involvement with American Magic, what do you think their chances are for this American represented team?
That's a very fair question. And quite honestly, I think they're probably, all the teams are going to be incredibly competitive for a multitude of different reasons, some reasons yet to be determined. I think, as I mentioned earlier in the show, that this is possibly New York Yacht Club's best chance at winning or having a chance at winning the America's Cup. So from a challenger standpoint, I think they look very good. But even Terry Hutchinson will publicly tell you quite bluntly, New Zealand's going to still be the hardest team to beat. They are the defender. They have the technological advantage, in terms of leading the design. And when you watch the videos of them training down in Auckland, they look extremely solid. Peter Burling at the helm, gold medalist, former America's Cup winner, and all of that crew. Everything about Emerites Team New Zealand is formidable. So I think American Magic has a very good chance of likely winning the Challenger Selection Series based on the effort that Terry and his crew are putting in. But then they've got a much bigger hurdle in beating the New Zealanders. So we'll see.
Yeah. Wow, that'll be fun to follow. So I know we've talked a couple of different times about how the growth of the sport of sailing in general is really important to you. You know, your work is with America's Cup, and there's lots of cool and fascinating things about the Cup itself. But you're not just a Cup guy. You love sailing in all of its forms, and I know you're very invested in seeing it grow from, you know, in every avenue, from the grassroots on up to the Grand Prix. So in your opinion, how's the America's Cup helping or hurting that pursuit, and what could America's Cup do to improve it?
That is an extremely good question, Joe. The first part of the answer is, you know, without question, being the pinnacle of the sport and certainly the most exciting in many ways aspect of sailing to experience live or on television. The America's Cup is the pinnacle event in the sport. So and the technology is so far advanced that it's inspiring sailors and non-sailors alike to get involved in what they're doing. I mean, you can't not be excited by a 75-foot flying machine that is capable of doing over 60 miles an hour levitating above the water. It's like a spaceship. And even if you're not a sailor, when you see that on TV, it's exciting to watch. So I think the Cup is definitely inspiring new sailors and sort of people who are on the fence about the sport. As far as what it's doing to grow the sport internally, there's good and bad. You know, the good is the trickle-down technology. The Cup, because of all the time, money, and effort that is spent in the quest for speed with the America's Cup, a lot of that technology eventually makes its way into mainstream sailing, and we all benefit. Examples of that are the famous wing keel from Australia too. But this current iteration, as I mentioned earlier, I think has gone a bit too far in the realm of technology, and it's marginalized the sailors a little bit. It's also a technology that, while extremely exciting to see, is very hard and to implement directly on your sailboat or my sailboat for many years to come. I don't think we're going to see cruising boats foiling at 50 miles an hour or double luff wing mainsails anytime soon. But two things that I think we will see trickle downs from this America's Cup are two things that actually have nothing to do with sailing. Not nothing to do with sailing, but nothing to do with going out on the water and on a boat. And that is simulation technology and also 3D printing. Those are two areas that I think have a lot of potential to trickle down into mainstream industry, both powerboats and sailboats. I think we're going to see more simulation in design, simulation in training, for example, Olympic class boats and things like that, and other sailing teams. And then in 3D printing, I recently went to Minnesota and did a presentation with Stratasys, and Robin Lesh, who's one of the engineers on the team, explained how they use 3D printing. And I brought an example that Stratasys gave me. You know, in previous America's Cups, if they needed a part on the boat, this, for example, is an aerodynamic fairing that goes on the bow, and the bobstay connects right here. Previous America's Cups, they'd have to measure everything out and fabricate it in carbon fiber, and then spend a couple of days curing it and sanding it and shaping it and then bolting it onto the boat. Robin took a look at what was needed where the bobstay was connected to the bow of the boat. She scanned that area of the boat, put it into a CAD program, and 2 hours later, this literally just printed out, bolted together, and is on the boat. You know, that type of technology, I think, has a lot of trickle down into areas of the sport that we haven't seen yet. So the America's Cup is always going to excite people, both sailors and non-sailors alike, to be attracted to the sport. And then the question is, well, how do we keep them involved? And more importantly, how do we keep existing sailors enthused and involved in the game? And you know, having watched the sport now for the past 3 decades and having a chance to travel to hundreds of yacht clubs, I meet thousands of people and I see what works and what doesn't. And I can tell you the good and the bad. The bad is, and we know this, I think it's common sense now, that sailing is takes itself too seriously at the highest level. It's too complicated. It is costly at certain levels, and has certain high barriers of entry that remove accessibility. And that just takes away the simplicity and the fun. And I think to grow our sport, we need to do completely the opposite. Stop worrying so much about how, making it complicated and making it, absolutely perfectly fair windward lewards. There are people out there now who are like, well, let's just go point to point and have fun. You don't have to spend a ton of money. The big giant maxi boats of yesterday that we used to see at events like the Big Boat Series in San Francisco or Key West Race Week. Now we're seeing much smaller boats on the water, which is one reason Charleston Race Week is so successful, because most of it is mid-level keel boats. And weeknight beer can racing is the one thing in our sport that is consistently on the rise, as well as junior sailing, and those are good things. And what's the consistent theme between those two types of sailing? Fun, simple fun. We got to put the fun back in the sport in order to grow it. I think that's one thing that sometimes those of us that get very attracted to the highest level of the sport can easily forget.
Yeah, that's great. Well, and I don't know whether you're seeing this in your part of the country, but here in the Northwest, and it sounds like from the U.S. Sailing Leadership Forum that took place a couple of days ago, it is starting to pop up elsewhere. The first sailing events that are likely to be allowable in this pandemic era, I think really fit that bill. They're shorthanded with either single-handed or members of just a single household. They're kind of a run what you brung, low-level handicap, if any at all, chase starts, all that kind of stuff, to try to just keep it really simple, often run without race committees on the water and using fixed marks. And so the kind of sailing, what sailor isn't thirsting for time on the water right now? And I think it's pretty cool to see that the first way that they're going to get back on the water, because of the parameters of social distancing guidelines, are going to be a perfect fit for what you just described in terms of that fun-focused casual sailing that in all likelihood is what got us all into the sport in the first place. So I will be excited to see a lot of that around, even as other things we love about sailing are less available for the time being. So fun's where it's at, man.
Absolutely. Let's have some fun.
Good deal. Well, that seems like a good place to wrap it up. Any closing thoughts about the fun of sailing, growth of the sport, or the America's Cup in general?
Well, it's okay to also mix cocktail hour with sailing as well. But no, I'm just kind of joking. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how you define fun, as long as you focus on that primarily in our sport, like we talked about. And, in a funny way, like you said, this coronavirus might have an interesting positive trickle down of getting people to focus on, back to their roots and back to, families going out on boats and spending time together. And what better way to social distance than get out on the water? I can't think of a better way, and I'm itching myself to get back out on the water after all this shelter in place environment. So I can't wait to see everybody back on the water, and hopefully in the near future, and then eventually in New Zealand, one way or another, virtually or in person, to experience the America's Cup. And send me an email if you want information on how to do just that. And Joe, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for taking the time and for helping give us all a window into the latest of the America's Cup. So thanks, Tucker.
You got it.
All right.
Take care.